Hey, teammates, welcome to our new series called The New Normal. And this is just an opportunity for us to help each of you find your new normal and this challenge in these challenging times that we're all going through. We're recording from right here at the Airy House where Tanya and I have lived for the last 3.5 years. And we're very, very excited to bring you some content and some leaders across not just across the Air Force, but across the world who can help us normalize things like working from home, being able to connect virtually, dealing with stress, managing fitness and mental wellness. So again, we really appreciate it. And I look forward to helping each and every one of you establish and maintain your new normal. Our very first guest on this new venture is someone I'm very, very excited to speak with. She's someone you might be familiar with as the host of the very popular podcast called The Happiness Lab. She's a professor of psychology at Yale University, and she teaches the most popular course in Yale University's history called Psychology and the Good Life. Her research and teaching focuses on evidence-based science of happiness and practical ways we can feel connected, hopeful, and happiness.
Most surveys show that Americans and a lot of people in general are not getting happier. And if you look at some subsets of the population, surveys like the Harris survey and so on have shown that certain groups are actually getting more unhappy. And one of those groups is recent graduates.
She is Dr. Lori Santos. Hey, I thought before we get into a little bit of your research, if you could tell me, I understand that one of your parents was in the Air Force?
Yeah, so my dad was in the Air Force
wow.
back in the late 60s, early 70s. I think he was a Sergeant E4. He was a voice interpreter during the Vietnam War. So he studied Mandarin and kind of listened to Chinese trafficking of aircraft, which was awesome. He actually still speaks Chinese even today, and just credits the Air Force with so much of what he was able to do in his career and so much of what he learned. And so he was actually really proud when he was like, "Who's interviewing you? Like that chief?" And he was like, "Oh," he looked you up, and he's like, "Oh," so you made my dad proud.
Yeah, well, tell him I said thanks for his service. I appreciate it. Yeah,
will do.
So man, these are some really tough times, and one of the things that you talk about quite often in your research is connection and the connection between being connected to other human beings and happiness. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about strategies for folks who are somewhat disconnected physically now, because so many of us and so many of our airmen are working from home and not being able to go in the office and kind of off of their normal routines.
Yeah, so a couple of threads there. I think one thing to know is that the science is really clear on social connection. It's absolutely essential for healthy mental functioning. The happiest people out there are also the most social. They hang out with people the most often. They make time for friends and family members. And so in some sense, there's no healthy mental functioning with social isolation. We have to fight loneliness. And I feel like, of course, that's an extra special challenge during this time where to be physically healthy right now, we need to socially isolate. And so, which is an even harder problem too, because the particular threat that we're facing now in some sense is other people, or at least the threat can be brought to you by other people. And so it's kind of a double whammy. The good news though, is that there's also research showing that the kind of social connection we get doesn't have to be face to face in real life. It can be face to face in real time, in some of the same way we're talking over Zoom right now. What doesn't work for social connection is, scrolling through an Instagram feed and clicking like, or, that doesn't work. But talking in real time where you can see someone's facial expressions, you hear them laugh, you hear their intonation in their voice, that's kind of as good as the real thing. And so the intervention is that we really need to be doing more of that right now, not less. And not just for the things I think we normally use conference calls and things for. Often a lot of us do that for business where we get used to using technologies like this for a meeting or something like that. We need more of this during informal time, like when we're chopping vegetables and we just need somebody to chat with, or making dinner, or while our kids are coloring on the floor, or even sharing exercise classes. I've been doing like joint yoga Zoom classes with friends who I would normally go to a studio with, but you do it together. And so I think that's the advice is, we have to use these technologies to connect in the ways we would normally connect, really informally, but kind of build those in. The problem is, as you know, it's like a little clunky, right? Like we have to log into this thing and schedule a time. But the good news is if you can get past that startup cost, the benefits are huge.
Yeah, no, I agree. We had a teammate who recently got promoted just Wednesday, I think. And so we did a virtual happy hour. We had about 10 of us, and we use this platform. We use Zoom, and it worked out great. Where we would normally get together and do it. So
I think that's part of it. Is we have to get over our own skepticism, because I bet if you told someone like, oh, we're going to do a virtual happy hour, people are like, really? That's stupid. That's going to feel worse than the real thing. Like that's just like, don't worry about it. But actually when you do it, it feels better than you expect, especially if, what you're doing is just trying to connect or celebrate or all that stuff. We can do that through these technologies.
Yeah. And what about, so I actually saw some people, I was watching your presentation on the class that you teach, and in the part where you're talking about connectivity, there were some questions that people had about, and I've asked this same question about introvert versus extrovert. So this connectivity, and whereas you talk about, hey, happy people spend time with other people, how does that necessarily affect people who may be a little bit more introverted and people just drain them? Being around people might drain them.
Yeah. So I think, you have to pay attention to your normal needs, right? And one thing we know from introverts is it's not so much that they have a hard time with other people, it's just that they might need more time alone. And so you kind of do want to build that in. But another thing we know from the research is that our theories about what makes us happy and what's good for us are often really bad. They kind of lead us astray. And for introverts, this is one domain where that happens in the context of social connection. So there's some work by Nick Epley and his colleagues. They do these studies where they kind of force people to have social connection, force you to talk to, before COVID, force you to talk to someone on your commuter train, right? And try to make a new friend on a commuter train. And what he finds is that introverts really strongly predict that that's going to be actively bad, that it's going to ruin their mood and be really awkward. But in practice, when they do it, they enjoy it much more than they think. First of all, they enjoy it more than baseline, but they also enjoy it much, much more than they think. Wow. And so one of the messages is that if you're an introvert and you feel like, I really don't want social connection, that might be, in some sense, as we say in my class, it might be sort of your mind lying to you. In other words, your theory about what you're going to like doesn't really map onto what you really need right now.
Oh, okay. And you did mention, let's talk a little bit about physical and mental wellness and how they really go together. And I know you talk a lot about exercising. 30 minutes of exercising is the equivalent of what's the
yeah, it's Zoloft as an antidepressant drug. Yeah, so it's as effective to improve depression symptoms.
Yeah. So what about for people today? I know you said you have a virtual yoga class. What are some other strategies that folks might be able to use?
Yeah, well, I think is one to just remember that it's so essential right now, and to realize how much less you're getting right now. I think all my friends are going through that. Especially we academics are doing a lot of teaching on Zoom and stuff. At the end of the day, we're like, oh, my back hurts. What's going on? It's like realize we've been just sitting more and not getting even the normal steps we would get in a day because many of us are housebound, right? But the strategies to get around that is, again, first to realize that it's important, but then there's so many different ways you can move your body in productive ways, like in your house, even in small spaces. And one of the awesome things about this crisis is there's so many people out there helping. There's so many gyms that are offering free classes online, so many yoga studios that have moved their classes to Zoom. And I think that's really important. In some ways you can get lots of like free gym materials just by watching all these cool, personal trainers online who are offering fitness classes. And the additional bonus is, as I said, like if you can do it with a friend, that does two things. One is like you have a commitment, right? Because you'll feel kind of like a jerk if you don't show up and you told your friend you're going to show up. So if you're feeling lazy that day, it's kind of a pre-commitment. It sort of forces you to do it. But then you also get some social time, even though you're exercising productively. And so it can kind of be a really win-win if you're using these classes and connecting with other folks at the same time.
Yeah. And I still see a lot of people out in my neighborhood that are biking and running too. So I don't think we're on a full, stay at home. So, the government and the leadership of, most of our states are encouraging people to stay home, but most of us can still get out and exercise. I personally jump rope, so I can get out on my back patio and do some jump roping too.
That's cool.
What do you see as the biggest challenge for people, particularly as it relates to being happy in a time like this, with
Yeah.
the unemployment, with the staying at home. Now, couples are maybe who both worked or one member worked, and now they're spending a lot more time at home with each other. Kids are home from school. Like, what is the biggest challenge from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there are so many. I mean, all the ones you identified. I mean, I think it kind of depends, if you're a family with kids, it might be, and you're still in work, it might be dealing with the kids and trying to work from home while you're running a babysitting service in the school. If you lost your job, it might be the economic challenge of what that's going to bring and a lot of the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. I think so many of us are going through a lot of different ones right now. And I think that's important to realize is that, what might be really bad for someone else, like it could look really good from somebody else's eyes, for the people who are complaining like, oh, I have to take care of my kids while I'm working at home. Like, that situation looks really good from somebody who just lost their job or whose business just, had to shut their doors, And so I think part of the message is just to be really compassionate that we're all going through a bunch of different stuff right now. And it's hard to know, but everybody's going through something, and just to kind of have a little compassion about what somebody else might go through and a little bit of patience as you're dealing with either your team members or other family members or just, people, friends of yours in your community too.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads to, one of your other points about stress and relationships. What do you think is most important when it comes to dealing with stress, particularly when it comes to relationships?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to pay attention to it. Here's something where we know as psychologists is that, there have been other disasters, things like hurricanes, and like stressful times. And often what you see, the data suggests that that's when divorce rates spike. In fact, there's like data coming out of Wuhan in China right now, and the people who are cooped up already, divorce rates are spiking there, right? And it hasn't even been that long. So it can be a really stressful time and a really dangerous time for marriages and relationships. But it can also be a really good time. In other previous disasters, we also know that the marriage rate jumps after a nasty hurricane or something like that, as does the birth rate. So some people are working it out to get together, right? And so the question is what can you do in terms of interventions to make sure your relationship is in the the happy baby making side and not on the divorce side? And in talking to folks who study relationships, folks like Eli Finkel, who's a relationships professor, and others. They suggest that one strategy is to really double down on the stuff that's good about your relationship. I mean, if we think about our marriages, many of us can think, these are the things I'm really good at. We're really good at communication. We're really good at humor. Or we just love playing games together, right? Think about the kinds of things that you do well and find ways to see if you can double down in this time. And sometimes you can do that in really creative ways because this new situation also sometimes affords opportunities for that stuff. A lot of us, for better or for worse, are getting a time windfall, either because we've lost our jobs or we're commuting less or, we just have a little bit more time. And so we could use that time really productively. Say, if you're a gaming kind of couple, bring that back. You might not have done that, since you first started dating, but you can sort of bring those things back. And so that's kind of the advice is to find the things you're good at and sort of double down. The second piece of advice is that this is a real time for kind of some patience and compassion, right? Because, when you're kind of in a situation with your spouse and you feel like they get snippy, a lot of how you react to it is your interpretation of it. You could be like, they're a jerk and they don't respect me. Or you could be like, you know what? They're having a really tough go of this. I'm just going to be a little patient. this is the time for me to take one for the team and so on. And that kind of positive attitude, that kind of we're in this together attitude right now can mean a lot, because if you kind of, are a little bit gentler with them, then that will probably be reciprocated. And it can lead to kind of this nice kind of spiral effect where you're kind of being nicer to each other over time.
Yeah. Any advice on building good habits? Because you're an expert, right, in this field. And so I would assume that it's relatively easy for you to take it from theory to actual practice, where for most of us, it's like, man, that's a great idea. But how do I get to exercising every day and connecting and managing my stress so that ultimately it will lead to a greater sense of happiness? What do you do to build good habits?
Well, first I'll come clean. I mean, I think that's one of the big challenges is, right, you can know what you're supposed to do, but actually putting it into practice is a challenge, even for me, even though I know this stuff maybe better than some other folks, but that doesn't translate into turning it into habit. To turn it into habit, it takes work. You just have to prioritize stuff. You just have to turn it into the thing that you're going to do no matter what. And that kind of makes it go. I will say though, there is a good thing about this time for forming new habits, which is that, if you think about what the science of habits suggests is that there are certain times that it makes sense to form a new habit. So like at the new year, when there's like a kind of period of a fresh start, or especially if you have a new situation, those folks in the military probably know that, when you first enlisted, you formed all kinds of new different habits when you were in a new situation. Now you're making your bed or you're exercising more and so on. So the research suggests that new situations are a great time to form new habits because it kind of breaks the old cycle. We're all right now in a new situation, working home, dealing with this crisis. It's a stressful situation and it's a hard one, but it's also one that we could try to harness if we want to. Now that you're in the situation of working from home, what's your new routine going to be like? Is that are you going to get up at 7 a.m. and do a yoga class or do an exercise class in the morning? Are you going to go out on that porch and do the jump rope because that's what you do now when you're working from home, or you do that right before lunch, when you get off your conference call? The good news is because this is a new weird situation, we can try to harness that and set up some new habits. And the great news suggests that if we succeed in that, we might have enough time in this new situation, sadly, that we can actually get those habits to stick. Because the research shows if you do a habit, for a long time, kind of in the range of like, for a month or two, then it sort of becomes a habit that's just easy. It's just kind of the thing you do now. And so maybe we could even start doing some of these better habits and make them stick, after this mess is over.
Yeah, I've been trying to get better. I read a couple of months ago, we were on a trip and I picked up James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Yep.
And so I've been trying. I hadn't been the greatest success, but it's been working out pretty good.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
I once heard that in the context of our life or our job or relationships that, hey, you're responsible for your own happiness. How true is that?
Oh, it's super true. I'll say with one caveat, right? Like, there are some genetic components to our well-being. It's easier for some of us than others. Those folks for whom it's going to be easy, but all of us can take actions to improve our own happiness. And what works isn't necessarily the situation. All of us can be happy even in bad situations, just as all of us can be really miserable and kind of sad in really good situations, right? And so I think you just need to know the right kinds of things to do, and you need to realize that it takes work and effort. And again, I think, this is something that the military sees all the time. Like, you realize, like, you can't just be prepared for battle. Like, it's going to take work and effort, and it's going to take training all the time, and you can't slack off. You can get physically fitter, even if you're not a very physically fit person, but you're going to have to put in some constant daily effort. Happiness works just like that. You can do it. You can experience more well-being in your life, but you have to put work in. And that work is even more important in a really stressful time like this.
Yeah. Any book recommendations in terms of happiness and coping with what we're dealing with today?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the ones that I've been reading that have been helping me. One is a book. It's actually not a psychology book. It's a philosophy book by the philosopher Bill Irvine. So he's a Stoic philosopher, one of these folks that kind of listens to the ancient Stoic wisdom. The Stoics were this group of Greek and then later Roman philosophers who really wanted to control their emotions. They weren't emotionless, which we think of Stoics, we think like get rid of all your emotions, but they really wanted to cultivate positive emotion. And his book is called The Stoic Challenge. And what he claims the Stoic Challenge is that, when bad things happen to us, instead of saying like, oh, woe is me, or getting angry about it, you could see it sort of as a challenge, and if he kind of jokes about sort of Stoic gods. He doesn't really believe in Stoic gods, but the Stoic gods kind of want to give you a really hard challenge today. And the idea is you can react and be like, this is it, game on. Like, this is my challenge for now. I'm going to get through this. And I love that because it's a completely new way to frame this situation, right? Like, this isn't a horrible crisis. This is a challenge for our family and my kids to get through this well. This is a challenge for our community that we're going to meet with our kind of game on faces. And again, I think it's a great book in general, but I think it's a message that will really resonate with the military, right? In that, the whole philosophy of the military is constantly putting our guys in situations in training where it's like really bad stuff so that you can kind of get through it and build those muscles that you need in terms of mental muscles and physical muscles and so on. And so Bill Irvine's advice is that that's the kind of thing we can do in our own lives in general, and especially right now. So the Stoic Challenge has been a really super helpful text for me to be reading right now.
Okay, I'm going to check that out. It reminds me a little bit of my boss, General Goldfein, the Chief of Staff for the United States Air Force. He always says, and as you can imagine, just like you mentioned, we always have challenging things. Something is always coming up. And he loves to say, in every challenge, there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
and an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to get better. So
And
yeah,
I
I like
think
it.
and in this one, I think there's a real opportunity to be happier later, right? I think all these things we're talking about, building in more social connection through these technologies, those are things we can do afterwards too, building up these positive habits that we want to see when we have a little bit of extra flexible time. Like those are things that are going to help us later. The ability for, if you're in a family, to be together with your spouse, and really close and kind of work on the relationship in this time and kind of meet that challenge, or to like have your kids around and set up some new family norms. Like we don't often like to talk about the positives in a yucky situation. It can feel weird that we're like, nobody wanted this crisis. This is awful and deadly and people are really suffering. But you can still see, the silver lining of it. And you can still kind of use it in the best way to allow yourself to achieve something later. There is an opportunity in everything, even something as yucky as this.
Yeah, that's true. How are your students doing? Did Yale already have a kind of a robust online program before all of this started?
Yeah, actually, no. So all of Yale's classes were live. And so it's kind of new for all these Yale instructors to figure out how to make use of an online environment, how to do that well.
Oh, wow.
I think I'll be honest. I think our students are in mourning. All the students had to leave campus, in the middle of spring break. They left their stuff here. So some of them don't have their stuff. Some of them, they're all over the country. They kind of miss their friends. And so, but again, trying to work with them to get back into this opportunity mindset as opposed to this kind of woe is me mindset. And I think it's really helping, and I think, again, expectations can be powerful. I think students were like, online classes aren't going to work and this is going to be so terrible. And they're learning like, no, I can socially connect with my friends online. Again, it's not as good as it could be. And it's not to say that we wanted this crisis to happen. It's awful that folks are suffering, but I can still personally make the best of it.
Yeah, I recently spoke to a couple of our students at the United States Air Force Academy out in Colorado Springs, and they were like you. All the classes were live, so they didn't have an online program. So some of them, one cadet actually told me, he was like, "Hey, I'm a nerd. I like doing this type of stuff." But there were a few others who they had some challenges transitioning to the online program. But overall, I think they're doing pretty good.
And I think it's tricky, you see this in the military too, where, in some ways a campus is a great equalizer. Students from really low income backgrounds or from not great home lives, they come here and they can all learn in the same way. Same thing with when you're on the base, right? Whatever you left behind, the base is a great equalizer. And so I think when we're in public health situations where we lose that, it can be really challenging. But I think everything we can do, especially if you're in a not great situation, to use these interventions to kind of improve your mental health where you can, it can be super powerful.
Yeah. What's your next big project? What are you working on?
Yeah, well, we've been doing this podcast called The Happiness Lab, which I highly encourage all the folks to listen to. Yeah. We're actually doing a special season now on COVID. We're trying to do 2 episodes a week specifically on topics related to COVID. So how you deal with social distancing, how you deal with kind of panic in your body and how your body's feeling and so on. And then season 2, which is our regular season, will launch hopefully at the end of April still. So that's been the thing I've been working on the most, trying to get this content out to as many people as possible.
Well, you're doing a great job. There's a young lady in my office by the name of Jamie Freeman, who I think connected us. And she is a huge, huge fan of yours. And she promotes your podcast to everybody in our kind of sphere. So yeah, thanks for all the great work that you've been doing.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And as I said, I have such gratitude to our enlisted men. I hope this is helpful. I hope you get some really practical tips that you can use to get through this mess.
Yeah, I sure will. And I'll pass along some of your other things, some of your YouTube videos. You got a lot of really good stuff. So thank you very much. I definitely appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It was great chatting with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Dr. Santos, for taking the time to chat with us today. Thank you for your leadership and thank you for the great work that you're doing in this area of keeping us all happy. Also, we'd like to encourage our airmen to check out your podcast, The Happiness Lab. We know you're doing a special COVID-19 series that we think will be useful for our airmen to tune into. And we'll provide a link to that particular show below. We hope this has been beneficial for you and that you can use it to become your best self in this new normal.